Welcome back. I was waiting for you guys to say it because I always begin with welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back to where we are, Wetaskiwin Composite High School. Today we're going to look at ideologies. Obviously, a topic that is the core of Social 30, but I like to introduce it in 9 if I ever have the displeasure of teaching that, and here in grade 10 as well. So when you leave this video, we want you to know what the definition of ideologies is, connected to two thematic families of ideologies, individualism and collectivism. Understand that ideologies contain themes, communicate values and beliefs, are built upon assumptions, and we're going to explore many different ideologies before this is done. There's also going to be a second half of this video, so bonus content right there. Number one, the definition of ideologies. This is a great quote. This is a simple definition. An ideology is a set of beliefs and values. Then you might be saying, beliefs and values about what? An ideology contains ideas, beliefs and values, about common themes. Themes like what? Themes like the nature of mankind. Are we born evil? Are we born good? We've already studied Hobbes, and we contrasted Hobbes with Locke. Hobbesian ideology is that we are evil by nature, and therefore government must control us. Ideology based upon a theme about mankind. Hobbes's ideology is based upon an assumption we are evil, and therefore he believes that the role of government is to control us, so he values authoritarianism. Locke, on the other hand, his assumption is that we are good by nature. That's the common theme, is what is our human nature. His assumption is we're good. Therefore, he values freedom, not security, and he believes the role of government is to free us, not control us. That's a definition of ideology by contrasting Hobbes and Locke. Another way to look at ideology is to contrast maybe Adam Smith and Karl Marx. Adam Smith and Karl Marx are central figures in two opposing ideologies. Smith is with capitalism and Marx is with Marxism, communism, and they have common. They're engaged in a common conversation about the purpose of the economy. What is the purpose of the economy economically? What is our economic role? What should we be motivated towards? So the capitalists and Adam Smith, they believe that self-interest, they assume that self-interest in the invisible hand is a viable foundational value that an economy can have to flourish, that greed is good, and that capitalism built upon greed will unlock growth and there will be general broad-based prosperity because of self-interest, and that's the invisible hand. Whereas in opposition, you have Karl Marx. Same conversation, same theme, right? He's talking about what's the role of the economy, and within it, what should be our primary motivator. And instead of being self-interest, Karl Marx says, no, we should be looking at collective interest. Our goal shouldn't be self, it should be the group. So he looks at the role of government, instead of allowing economic freedom, should be to try to create a system where there's cooperation instead of competition, where there's a push towards helping others instead of helping oneself. They need to change your hearts and minds so you wake up in the morning and live that day not for personal glory, but for the glory of others. As Marx said, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Same conversation, what's the purpose of the economy? But within that, there's going to be assumptions and values and beliefs. And Smith and Marx, having the same conversation, end up coming up with different answers. So a simple definition, beliefs and values. Up here we have a little bit of a more complicated definition that includes things like worldview and the idea that sometimes ideologies can have this nuance, this layer of wanting us to be crusaders, that we want to go around and we want to influence others. We want to spread our ideology. One way to look at ideology and understand it better is to begin to group them. So one way to understand vehicles better is to say, okay, that's a car, that's a truck. Or to understand colors better That's green. Green is good. That is red. Red is bad. Red's bad. Red in the economy means that your shares are going down. Green means good. So, not a simple, but an effective way to begin to contrast ideology is to put them under two different layers. Is it celebrating the individual, or is it prioritizing the group? So we have two groupings here, individualism and collectivism. And this chart is from a social 30-2 textbook, and I put it in my notes because it is a brilliant contrast between things like individuality versus conformity, between privacy versus the idea of what's the opposite of privacy? Group norms that you're subject to conform to, right? You have things like competition on the individualism side and cooperation on the collectivism side. You have the idea under individualism of private wealth, and under collectivism, shared wealth. Under individualism, you have uniqueness and self-worth. And under collectivism, you have the idea that it's not about the strength of the individual or the uniqueness of them, but through conformity and uniformity, then the group can be strong. So within the ideologies today, there might be nuances of collectivism and individualism to look for. And you can always come back to the chart. So an ideology is a set of beliefs and values about a theme. One of the themes that ideologies often have a conversation about is the desirability of change. So one of the first spectrums that you see in Social 9, I'm sure you remember it because you love Social 9 so much and you wrote those notes down from the board, is the idea of, is change desirable? And I often begin with the right of center ideological family of conservatives because they like the status quo. Status quo is kind of like it the way it is. We don't really want to change. So that's a natural place to begin. On a spectrum, right of center, politically, you have conservatives. They dislike change, they like traditions. Edmund Burke is a classic conservative, and I really believe that his thoughts summarize it best when he talks about we are a link in a great chain of being. And it's a betrayal to our ancestors to radically deviate from what they have given us, our birthright, right? Their suffering has allowed us to have this life, and we shouldn't just abandon their values quickly. We shouldn't just abandon their way of life quickly. We need to hang on to tradition, that there's value in what they've done for us. So status quo, the way it is, that's what conservatives like. Now, if you're pro-change, we call that liberalism. Liberalism is, if conservatism is right of center, liberalism is left of center as a political idea. So they have the same theme, is change good? Conservatives are like, we don't really like change. We're slow to change. And liberals are like, no, we're more progressive. We are more change orientated. Let's try new solutions to old problems. That's liberalism. Rather than keep doing the same old solution, let's put Stuart Skinner in net. Boy needs to come out of net. He's not great. We need a new solution. We need a new goalie. Can't be so conservative with the lineup kind of thing, right? So we have conservatives on the right side of the spectrum, liberals on the left, but that's not the end of the spectrum. What if you're really, really excited about change, and you're so excited you're willing to, murder to achieve it? Well, that's your French Revolution, isn't it? So those that are radically in favor of change, we're going to call them radicals, and they're on the extreme left. Of course, just like liberals have a counterbalance that are conservatives, radicals will have an opposite. What's the opposite of someone that is violently in favor of something new? Someone that's violently in favor of something old. We call those reactionaries. And depending upon the time and place, a reactionary might be a fascist. So in Mussolini's Italy, if he's trying to really create the third Rome, bring back the glory of the Roman Empire, bring back the glory of the Holy Roman Empire, this is going to be the third installment, or Hitler calls his Reich the Third Reich, and he's drawing upon glory of the past. And if they're willing to use violence to recreate that, they're probably reactionary, extreme right. So what I've done here is describe the idea that what are ideologies? Well, often they have a common talking point, a theme. One of the themes that we look at is the desirability of change. Underneath that, you have four key ideologies: radical, liberal, conservative, and reactionary. Next up, ideologies promote values and can be used to justify things like exploitation. So this is like an added nuance. Maybe the theme is a little more complicated than just change, but maybe the theme is going to be about competition. So we're going to have two perspectives here that are going to look at the idea of competition. And we're going to see that there is some contrasting of their assumptions and values and beliefs. And from that, we can expose different ideologies. So, for example, one ideology we've talked about in class is realism. So when I think of realism, I think back to the Peloponnesian War, and I think of the Athenian quote, "The strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must." So in a competition, what should be the rules of the game? From a realist perspective, those in power can do whatever they want because they have the power to do so. Might is right. Survival of the fittest, realism, those ideologies are based upon a conversation about competition. When we are in competition with others, how should we act? Realists say those with power can act however they want. If Russia has the tanks to take Ukraine, then they should take it. That's a realist perspective. But then others might find that troublesome. They might find that violating. So you might have something like humanitarianism, where instead of just having your emphasis on power, your emphasis might be on human rights. A humanitarian isn't going to say it's justifiable for the Russian military to invade Ukraine because they have the might to do so. A humanitarian would say, oh, wait, what about the cost to human lives? Because their focus is human. So, same conversation, foreign relations, competition for territory. A realist might end up assuming, might is right. And because of that, they value militarism, they value confrontation, they value things like adding territory and annexation. And through that, they have an aggressive foreign policy that includes war. Whereas a humanitarian, because their main concern is about human rights, including the right to life, they might value diplomacy ahead of war because they want to avoid conflict. If somebody is a humanitarian, they're more likely to want to become a stakeholder or a problem solver in all global conflicts, even if they're not directly involved, because all humans have value. Whereas if a country is only motivated by power for themselves, if there's a problem happening halfway around the world, they don't care. So it's a realist perspective when Neville Chamberlain says, we are going to appease Hitler. We're not going to go to war over mud huts halfway around the world. Literally, that's what he says. That's not a humanitarian thing. A humanitarian would say the lives there are equal to the lives here. We can't allow injustice there any more than we would allow injustice here. So what we have there is a contrasting of different ideologies. There it was realism and humanism. I don't even have humanism on this page, but it just fit nicely. They're talking about the same thing is it okay to enforce your will upon your neighbors? Realists, fascists, social Darwinists, they would all say it's not only justifiable, but that's the way you become more powerful. So we have some passages here that you can always look at to go back and see if you can see those ideologies in them. Another way to look at an ideology is an ideology, a set of beliefs and values, the way you see the world as it is, as it was, as it always should be. Another thing about ideologies is they are meant to try to shape our hearts and minds, and through that, our actions. So an ideology is meant to influence the way you react to the world and the world that you're trying to create. That's your heart and your mind. And through that, it should shape your action. Much like if somebody is religious, then their belief in religion shapes their heart and mind and hopefully influences their action. You can't just be a Christian in heart and mind. There's an action involved in being a follower of Christ. So we have the same thing here with fascism, that there's beliefs and values that influence your hearts and minds, but then there's an action connected. So within fascism, there's role of government. They're meant to unite the people through ultranationalism, but there's a role of citizens. And it's summed up very well by Mussolini. Everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. What does that mean? Well, the citizens can't challenge the state. Citizens must obey the state. And we have Sorel and Schopenhauer and Gentile as well. The idea that life only has purpose if you submit to the will of the supreme. Life will only have purpose if you obey the state, and the state will decay unless it's led by an authoritarian leader. So all of those fascist influences shape this idea that citizens submit and government controls. That's a big part of fascism. We see that in the Nazi policy of Gleichschaltung, where everything was coordinated under the party, so then that Adolf Hitler, the head of the party, had absolute control over all aspects of German life. And their values are things like loyalty and conformity and unity, and the measurement of success of their life isn't well, I had a good life. This is the glory that Germany had because of my life. Built on assumptions, though. If you're going to embrace an elitist perspective, then you're assuming that elite individuals like Hitler will end up having solutions that will be to the benefit of the nation. So, for example, Hitler rises to power because of social, cultural, economic, and political crises that Germany is facing in 1933. On the political side, they have instability in the Reichstag, instability that has led to frequent elections. So Hitler has a solution inspired by his ideology. Inspired by his ideology, his solution is to disband the Reichstag, outlaw all other political parties, and rule by decree. And in his mind, it makes sense because he believes Carlyle's great man theory. He believes that he has a destiny to rule, and he doesn't need to be held accountable by people less than he is because he has wisdom and will beyond theirs. That matches Schopenhauer's supreme will and the ideas of Gentile and Sorel as well. But the problem is that assumption, in hindsight, is proved wrong. Once he rules by decree, he rules in an unaccountable way. It's kind of like, to some extent, in Alberta here with the notwithstanding clause being used again and again and again. Now, decisions are being put into policy without review, without legislative review, without judicial review. And without that review, then sometimes decisions can be wrong. For example, Operation Barbarossa directly led to the demise of the Third Reich. Had there been a Reichstag, had there been opposing parties, had there been accountability, maybe the Third Reich lasts longer because they wouldn't have invaded a foe that they couldn't beat. So the assumption of elitism that the Führer principle, those among us more capable don't need to be held accountable by those weaker, actually led to the downfall of the Third Reich. There's some additional things there because people like to learn more about fascism. This course is about globalization. So we want to make sure we make some connections to globalization. In the second half of this course, we're going to be talking about transnational corporations. We're going to talk about global capitalism. So the word capitalism is going to come up a lot. Capitalism is really going to become an ideology that's going to become global because of the Industrial Revolution. So we want to make sure that we can understand the correlation between capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, and globalization, right? Globalization, we're interconnected. What connects us? Economics is a clear nuance connecting us. What ideology has been embraced that is pushing people to find new markets, new customers, and that's capitalism. In the seek of profit, we've connected. And what has made that connection possible? Revolutions in how we do business and how we make products and how we move products, the Industrial Revolution. So we have that there as well for you to think about. We have things being again. This is a look at individualism versus collectivism. I love this quote from 1609 Jamestown. He that will not work shall not eat. So we're not just going to give you free stuff. You have to earn it. This is very much similar to Margaret Thatcher's quote that pennies don't fall from heaven. They must first be earned here on earth. The idea that we have to work for what we get, that there's no free lunch. So during COVID, the government gave people COVID emergency relief checks. There was no requirement to do something to earn it. And in Canada, there's a discussion about guaranteed income. That shows this gap between collectivism, guaranteed income, let's look after each other, or capital or individualism. You need to work. You need to take an interest in your own outcome. Things like invisible hand fit into that theory. But with invisible hand, often capitalism, we have inequality that emerges. The workers often don't see the benefits that the bourgeoisie, the capitalists get, the robber barons. And that's why we'll have these rejections like socialism and Marxism come up. So what is socialism? If capitalism is an ideology based upon economic private property and self-interest, socialism is an ideology saying maybe we should have more public property and more collective interest. Maybe we need to care for each other rather than just ourselves. What is communism? A communist is a socialist. But a communist is a socialist that believes that in order to have socialism as our ideology, we're going to need to use violence. So communism is authoritarian socialism. It's a violent means to achieve the same end. Social Darwinism is a different conversation than capitalism and socialism. Social Darwinism is used in our course, our Social 10 course, more in relation to foreign relations. Social Darwinism was an ideology used by Europeans and other, for lack of a better term, white nations to justify the racist foreign policies of imperialism. What gives us the right to carve Africa? Well, because we're more civil than they are. And with social Darwinism came racial biology and phenology and eugenics and studies that tried to somehow quantify the claim that Europeans had, through survival of the fittest, evolved to be stronger. And now we know that that's all bunk. White man's burden is connected to the racial biology. So connected to the idea of we need to go carve Africa or go to Asia is the idea here shown by the British, John Bull, carrying people up past slavery and cannibalism and ignorance and vice and cruelty and brutality. And without the aid of the glorious Europeans, these individuals would never achieve civilization. So the white man's burden, coupled with the racial biology of social Darwinism, leads to the age of empires, where the British Empire covers a quarter of the Earth's surface, where the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, the Spanish all commit crimes around the world, under the illusion we're here to help you. Some would say that the IMF and World Bank in the 20th century are continuing the legacies of the empires from before their creation in 1945. Decolonization is a reaction to the imperialism. This is the idea that we don't want to be a colony. We want to be independent. We want to be independent. Gandhiism would be one form of decolonization. Gandhiism is different because Gandhiism contains an element of nonviolent non-cooperation. Nonviolent non-cooperation that Gandhi gets from this person from history. I don't know if you've heard of him, Jesus Christ. And the nonviolent non-cooperation is an idea that will impact others like Martin Luther King. And that's how we can contrast the work of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X in America. Malcolm X in America wanted the same thing as Martin Luther King Jr., which was the empowerment of African Americans. Malcolm X thought that they could do it through violence. MLK Jr. realized that it was only through nonviolent, non-cooperation that they could expose the injustice that white America had been forcing upon them. And that injustice is shown here in the Woodward's counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, in that photo from the civil rights movement. And there's Malcolm X, claiming violence is the solution, as opposed to the nonviolence. Dump mustard over my head, dump whatever over my head. I'm not going to move, but I'm not going to punch you in the face. If I punch you in the face, then violence begets violence, and it justifies your conclusion that I need to be controlled. If I respond with violence, then that justifies your control. But if I respond to your injustice with nonviolence, then it exposes your brutality. Now you become the problem. Last ideology that's listed here is environmentalism. I think it's the true counter to capitalism. Capitalism is growth without thinking of the consequences, the externality, and environmentalism is the idea that our biosphere is unique, it's irreplaceable, it's essential, and therefore our economic actions need to consider the environmental consequence. Are our economic actions sustainable? If not, then they're not viable. The earth has finite resources, including air and water, and therefore industrial growth in and of itself shouldn't be the goal to an environmentalist. That there's other things like clean air that isn't a commodity, but has value beyond what we could put a price on. We could make a new factory on the edge of Wetaskiwin, and we could pollute the air, and people could go and work at the factory, make a little bit more money than they work at places here in town now. But because of the polluted air, maybe people in Wetaskiwin begin to die of cancers and stuff more likely. And this happened in East Germany and other places in Europe in the second half of the 20th century because of a lack of environmental regulation. Lifespan was decades less than it would be elsewhere. You might make 10% more, but you're going to live 30% less. That's a trade-off environmentalists are not excited about. So some things that ideologies talk about: role of individual, role of state, things like how much of the economy should be controlled by the government. I'm going to pause that there. And the second half, we're going to look at a chart that's going to blow your mind as to contrasting these ideologies.